we acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. So it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning. My name is Marijke. I'm Associate Vice-Provost, Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. And whether you're applying for a Canada Graduate Scholarship at the master's or doctoral level or any other major award, we know that preparing a successful application can feel overwhelming. So today we're joined by two professors and a scholarship recipient who will share strategies, stories, and insights to help you navigate the process with confidence. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. We have Dr. Maria Cherba. Dr. Maria, sorry, I'm having some issues with my screen here. Dr. Maria Cherba, Professor, Faculty of Arts, University of Ottawa. She was a committee member for the SSHRC Doctoral Fellowship in 24-25. We have Dr. Nicolas Ng-A-Fook, Professor, Faculty of Education, University of Ottawa, past SSHRC committee member for doctoral fellowships. And then we have Giovanni Andrade, PhD student in experimental psychology, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Ottawa, and a SSHRC Canada Graduate Scholarship recipient. Thank you all for being here today. So our event will unfold in two parts. We will first have 45 minutes of discussion with our panelists, followed by 15 minutes dedicated to your questions. Some questions are for all three panelists. Some are more for the evaluators. Some are more for the recipients. So I will tell you which questions are for whom. But the first question is really for all three panelists, asking what sets apart a winning application from just a good one. And maybe Maria, do you want to start?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I would say, based on my experience on the selection committee last year, the biggest thing was to make sure that your application is written in a way that is clear and accessible to an evaluator who is not an expert in your particular field, or even who's an expert in your particular field, but not an expert in your particular methodology, for example. So it's really important to explain all of your concepts, choices, justify everything to make sure that it's clear, that there is nothing kind of taken for granted, and that's, I think, what really made a difference. And I've seen some situations, I'm in communications, for example, and we've had a couple of cases where I would, have an application. I know the field really well, and to me it was such a great application. But then someone, for example, in geography, they're like, okay, I understand that you think this research is important, but to me, as it is written, I'm not able to understand everything. So that, I would say, what was the biggest thing. So explain even, the impact of your research on the advancement of knowledge on the Canadian society. Just make sure to explain it to someone who is a researcher, but not an expert in your particular field or methodology.
Thank you very much, Maria. Nicolas?
Well, I'll just follow up on the last thing that Maria said. I think the most important thing to think about is the current context of what's transpiring either here in Canada or the world, because the evaluators are fellow human beings and they pay attention. And so it really make the case of that those macro contexts in relation to how the research you're proposing can make a difference in the lives of fellow Canadians, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And so that's really important. I think everyone's application that makes it to the evaluators, they're already excellent proposals. And so if you can really stress the importance and timeliness of the research that you're proposing to benefit everyone here in Canada as a federally funded research grant, then the more likelihood around the people sitting around the table can see the value. So I think that's an important factor that makes a key difference for those sitting around the table and reading the submissions.
Thank you for
And
that
if I can
perspective.
could I just add a little thing to what Nicholas just
Yeah.
said? So one good strategy to do that I found in some of the application is to use like statistics, Canadian statistics. You know, we have a great website by Statistics Canada. You can find data for a lot of social issues. So sometimes using those numbers at the beginning to show the importance of a problem or of a phenomenon or impact of your research can be a really nice way to show that to a non-expert audience, but also to any reader.
Yeah. Or a news media article. You could start off your proposal
Yeah.
with
Mm-hmm.
referring to things going on in the news by citing the media. So that'd be another
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken note. Macro context, very interesting concept. Giovanni.
Yes, so I think I'd like to say something about the proposal section and kind of reiterate what Maria and Nicholas said, and also add something that doesn't have to do with the proposal. So just, yeah, reiterating what they said, I think it's extremely important to have a proposal that's both compelling and clear. So I think a winning application goes beyond just describing our project. It should highlight certain things like how your interest developed. I think that's important, why you're motivated to take on this project, why you're the right one, and as was discussed, like the broader implications of your research. So just I thought as a concrete example of kind of what I did was I showed how my previous work on perfectionism and mental health, because that was kind of developed into an interest in like perfectionism and teamwork and sort of like interpersonal dynamics, and just stressing, I guess, how this has broader implications for social harmony and like socioeconomic development. But also making sure that all of this is easy to follow, I think, is important because, as Maria was saying, those who are evaluating, your proposal won't necessarily be experts in your area. So just and what I found very helpful there was just getting advice from like multiple different people. Of course, your supervisor could provide expert advice, but don't stop there. I think getting feedback from my peers, from people outside of my field, I even asked my parents to look over it. And I think if they're able to follow sort of the importance of your research, that's a really good sign. And I'll just add, I guess, a second thing that came to mind was I think a winning application is a well-rounded one. So like the research criteria seems to be like evenly split between research potential and like relevant experiences and awards. So on the one hand, it is very important and it can't be stressed enough to have a compelling proposal and highlight any sort of research contributions. But also, I wouldn't underestimate how far it can go to illustrate things like your training, your scholarships, and professional and extracurricular involvement. I think this really made a difference in my own case. I was able to show how I was involved in mentorship, how I helped organize a conference, and my involvement in like graduate associations. It doesn't mean you have to have done everything, of course. I think we all have different strengths, but just taking the time to focus on for example, the research contributions and relevant experience and activity section, I think, can go a long way.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question is for the reviewers. So what do reviewers wish more applicants understood about the application process? Nicola, do you want to go first?
Well, so I think it's really important. Like for my doctoral students, you have two strategies. One, your proposal has to make it out of your faculty. So you have internal reviewers that have certain sensibilities and rankings when they read over and what they deem to be of really good proposal. So you have to think of your readers when you're writing it. So you have the internal reviewers, and then you have people like me sitting and reading, as Maria said, like a whole bunch of submissions that are already excellent because they've already been reviewed. So we're receiving the best of the best from all over the country already. A lot of those that have been submitted have really strong reference letters. So because they're already all strong proposals, the next thing that you might look to as a reviewer is how strong are the letters. And so it's super important to get really strong letters from your 2 references that might submit, or 3, or whatever grant that you're applying for. The final thing that I would say for a reviewer is knowing that you can read certain things that are proposed research and they're good, but what makes it even distinguishable from the others is, have you gone and looked at the SSHRC challenges? If you're applying for the SSHRC how have you connected your research to the SSHRC challenges, or one of them? What are the wider university strategic priorities for your university and then within your faculty? Again, it might just be one sentence here or one sentence there, but it shows that not only are you connecting the funding that you're going to receive for the research that you're doing to the university strategic priorities, but also your faculty strategic priorities, and then the challenges put forth by the Canadian government through the SSHRC priority challenges. So those kind of things, when I'm sitting and the process of putting it together, means that you've taken the time first to propose your research and frame it, but also making those kind of little rhetorical strategies to connect it to the importance of the institution like Ottawa U in terms of where you're at, your faculty, and then those challenges at SSHRC. So those things I'd be reading for, and then strong letters. And the last thing I'll say is that you submit transcripts, and Maria might have gotten into conversations about grants that she thought were really good. I got into debates about a student's transcript where they had a bad year, and they were being penalized for having one bad year, but they explained why, and their grades were good. So it's an important part of the process that if you had any years that somebody might explain, just say, hey, this year these things happen, but if you look, like I've demonstrated, my capacity to do this work, so that you're being proactive rather than letting someone read your academic transcript in a passive way. So always be proactive to share the background behind the story you want to tell for your academic transcript as well when you submit your proposal and application.
Yeah. And again, I heard that connection to the macro context when you start linking to university strategic priorities or faculty strategic, it's again connecting with what's out there. Maria, process.
Yes, I agree with everything that Nicola just said. One thing I can add is, as evaluators on the committee, we use the same evaluation grid with the selection criteria that you have on the SSHRC website. So those same tables, those are exactly the ones that we use. So make sure that your application clearly addresses each of the criteria. And I think it's important what Giovanni just said about that 50-50. So there's a 50% for the research project, but then the other 50%, which is like basically half of your mark, this is very like a big portion of your grade, is for relevant experience. So make sure to address those 2 components equally. And maybe, just also add to what Nicholas just said about, having a bad year, that it doesn't, really matter if you explain it. Just the evaluators are really on your side, like as members of the committee, we really want you to succeed. And also for you to know, unfortunately, due to, limited funding, sometimes we have excellent applications that can be funded. So, if ever you're not funded the first year you apply, I know it is discouraging, but try not to be discouraged and just reapply next year. Because sometimes due to those constraints, even if your application is excellent, sometimes just like a 0.1 or 0.2 can make a difference. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the third question is about what are the biggest mistakes that hurt applications? Maria, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I can mention maybe 2 things. The first one, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but from what I experienced in the committee, that was, I would say, the biggest thing is the lack of clarity and sufficient justification for evaluators who are not experts in your specific area or your specific methodology. So you really have to make sure that your application is accessible to a broader audience of researchers. Don't assume that everyone will know, the concepts or the methods that you're proposing, even if they are very frequently used in your specific subfield. So really clearly define, explain each element, kind of take the reader by the hand and walk them through your proposal. And I would say the second thing, maybe sometimes we see some like the structure, even the structure of the document, this is not the place to be like creative and play with the structure. You need a very clear classical proposal, like, objectives, questions, methods, calendar. Sometimes we read applications that try to get a little bit creative with the structure, or like suggest, I don't know, more creative form of writing, which can be very interesting, but sometimes can make it hard for the reviewers to understand those specific points in your proposal. So I would say just, follow the directives to the letter and follow the required structure to the letter.
Thank you. Nicola, what can hurt applications?
I think the biggest thing, just to echo what Maria said in terms of clarity. So imagine, I always try to encourage students, and I try to remind myself, is that to write for a grade 10 student audience. So, I mean, if my 15-year-old can't read the proposal and understand kind of the general gist of it, then I haven't clearly articulated proposal. So again, like I would think of audience in terms of clarity for the general public to be able to, so general public should be able to understand, not just experts sitting on a panel reviewing it. The other thing is I want to come back to letters. Like, so it's super important. Like when you ask someone to write a letter, ask them if they're going to write a strong letter. Like somebody say, yeah, I'll write you a letter, but it's not a strong letter. And what I've seen as an evaluator is almost like template letters being provided by different universities for their students. So it's like the letters are structured in a similar way. They're super strong. And so it becomes hard for University of Ottawa if we're not writing strong letters in terms of other universities having a whole process to ensure that should a proposal make it out of the faculty, that there's strong letters of support that accompany it, and even out of the university. So again, every proposal or application that I've read, they're already strong, they're excellent proposals. And then what you look to is the kind of arguments that the supporting letters make for the award to be awarded. So it's not just a reference letter. And so we're even working with your supervisor and maybe a member of your committee with them to articulate why your work is so important and how you've been well prepared to do the work that you're carrying out and been part of, say, a research team if you've been afforded to do so, that you're currently working on research activities with them and you're working to co-publish. Again, if you're afforded opportunities to do so, if not, have that conversation with your supervisor to see how you can do that, or if there's other opportunities at the university as a whole where you can kind of participate in those activities to kind of make your CV a little bit stronger in the application.
Okay, thank you very much. One more question for the reviewers. What sections of applications do applicants typically underestimate? Maria.
Yeah, I can give a specific example here again from my experience in the committee last year. There was one particular section. We often had this one particular discussion as a committee in relation to research ethics. So the responsible ethical conduct of research is one of the evaluation criteria. And in a number of applications, we saw that there was just kind of like a short sentence, I will seek ethical approval from my university, and that was it. But the reviewers were expecting a lot more in terms of that discussion, so a more in-depth reflection on research ethics, especially if the project involved human participants. So that was one aspect where in our committee, we sometimes deducted points for otherwise excellent projects, because those that point about the research ethics, that's really important, wasn't discussed in a lot of depth. So that's one specific example that I can think about. And the second thing, maybe just again going back to what Giovanni said, yeah, make sure that you address those two parts equally. So the research part, but also all of the second part with relevant experiences. Don't neglect that part, because that's half of your score for the application.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicola.
Can you just re-ask? I was just typing a response to someone's question. So
yeah, no problem. So we're asking what sections of the applications they typically underestimate.
yeah, I would say I would say the objectives, like, so to be clear around the objectives, and connected to your research methodology. So one of the aspects that reviewers are going to look at is feasibility. So like, can you actually do the research that you're proposing? Is it too ambitious? Or doable in the time allotted for your doctoral studies program. So I would look at those two things, like clear objectives in terms of what you're, and again, it's what Maria said. It is a proposal, so I mean, you can take poetic and aesthetic license later on in the work that you're doing, but for this, they want to be clear. Here's my objectives and what I try to accomplish. Here's the contributions, and here's the theoretical framing, for example, and the ways in which we're going to take up this work, and here's the research methodology, and then potential contributions. So it's super important just to be clear. You don't have much room to address these things as well. So trying to be as clear as you can and to bring in all the nuances and complexities and links is super important.
Okay, thank you very much. So time to get some questions to Giovanni, a recipient. So what was your biggest challenge preparing your application and how did you overcome it?
I'd have to say that the biggest challenge I faced was getting started with the proposal. Yeah, it felt very overwhelming to me because of course, there's all these parts and sections that you have to address. And ironically, given my research on perfectionism, it was very difficult to accept an imperfect first draft. So that really delayed me, I believe, from getting started. I was like, oh, I just need to delve even deeper into the literature, or I have to just keep brainstorming all these ideas. And while I think that's important, there reaches a point where you have to just start writing. And so, and I would get stuck in like different sections. So it was hard yeah, I would just focus on the lit review and spend, hours upon hours there. And so I think the way that I overcame this, which is similar to how I approach academic articles now, is I accept that the initial draft is going to be imperfect. I allow myself to write a bad first draft. And then I guess that I realize like, then I'll be able to revise and improve it, integrate feedback from others, change my ideas and improve them a bit. And that's when hopefully the proposal will become more compelling and clear. I also think it helped to kind of see the proposal in terms of to like divide it into like manageable pieces. So today I will be working on the lit review or the method section. And I think just taking it one step at a time made a big difference to me.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I hear you say just start writing and just get going. And even if you kind of block, let it and go to the next and just move on and it will come all together. But to do that, you need sufficient time. So timing is of essence when preparing this. Another question for you, Giovanni. How did you approach writing your research proposal when you had limited publications or research experience?
Right. This definitely is a challenge I faced, particularly, well, this time, the time I won, it was my second time applying. The first time I did not win. And since I had I came in with CGSM, in my first year, in my first semester, I was having to put together a CGSD draft. That was very difficult. And I think I approached it by trying to demonstrate a solid understanding of the literature. So things like including relevant references, sort of trying to show the gap that I had identified. And also importantly, I think focusing on the method section to show that you have a good understanding of what has to get done, the methods that you'll have to use, the analyses. I guess just showing that you're ready to just conduct the research and you're prepared to do that, even if you haven't done a lot of research in the past. I also leveraged the limited research I did have. So like I had commented earlier, I had some research on perfectionism and mental health. So I was able to kind of use this to transition into my proposed research, which also deals with perfectionism, but in the more team dynamic and interpersonal relation context. So I was able to show how I guess my initial research led me to focus on these aspects of perfectionism.
Yeah, you demonstrated a connection between past experiences, how limited they were, but how they will help you move forward with your current project.
Exactly.
So, and highlight that connection, make it visible, make
Yes.
it clear to the reader that this connection exists. All
Absolutely.
right. So the next question again is for all three, and we're going to talk about how approaching your research what makes a reference letter truly effective, and how should students guide their referees? And I know we've already briefly touched on that, but we'll go back to the topic because it is important, as we learned from Nicolas already. So Maria, do you want to start?
Sure, and yeah, Nicola has already mentioned several important points about the letter. Yeah, I would say two things that stood out to us at the committee that I was part of. The first one is you need to kind of ensure like the coherence between the letter and the proposal. So make sure that you allow sufficient time to your respondents to, really comment on your research, on what you presented in your application. And one specific thing that sometimes myself as an evaluator I found quite impactful is when your supervisor, for example, or another person who is an expert in your field can in their letter also say something about the impact of the research. That I think really adds a lot of weight to your project overall. So when an expert says, okay, this research is really important, or sometimes even small comments like, I would say Giovanni's name because the example here, but like Giovanni participated in this one conference, but this is like the most important conference in our field and so competitive. So that just helps to contextualize your contributions from an expert's point of view. And that was quite helpful to us, I think, as reviewers.
Okay, thank you. Nicolas?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to use the same template for my letters, and it seems to be working. But first, I stress the professional training that the University of Ottawa and our faculty has been able to afford the student who's applying. So either qualitative research expertise and the different ways of doing qualitative research and methodologies, so literature reviews, capacity to go look at databases, archives, quantitative research if they're doing that, mixed methods. So I'll list a series of skills and that we would expect whether you're at the MA level or PhD level or postdoc level for that individual to have, and just reiterate that they've been prepared and they have that skill set necessary to take on the research. And then I would give a recap summary of the research that they're proposing. And as Maria said, make the case for why it's so important for fellow Canadians, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. And then at the end, talk about any kind of additional factors. So I really encourage students, usually the proposal, I probably go over like 9 or 10 versions of it over the month of August and September before the October deadline of their proposal itself. And then we look at their CV that they're putting forth, and then whatever additional narrative. So I help students also shape their CVs, based on what they've done and what they're gonna, what they've been involved with, that they might not think's important, but to add, they might just take it for granted, as Maria said, like, whether it's conferences or serving on committees at the university or being a research assistant or a TA, to really kind of outline that and to showcase some of the prior funding. Like if you're fortunate enough to be a student and have admission scholarship to university, well, that's funding that's right there, or any other kind of funding. And somebody asked about extracurricular, to fit some of the extracurricular like volunteering or serving community. So more and more now, in terms of the shift of what we deem important in academia, in terms of serving community and doing community-based research or university community partnership research, or prior to it being involved in community work. I think that's important. And if you can highlight that connection, if you're proposing to do that kind of research, also in demonstrating that you have that prior capacity in your CV as well is also important. So those things, we don't have a lot of room in the letter, but I try to kind of follow the logics and rationale of going through that in the reference letter. And like I said, it's really like your supervisor's one thing. You would expect your supervisor to write the letter, that they have time, like Maria said, give them adequate time to write the letter. But then also somebody that would know and want to write a strong letter for you as that second letter as well.
Yeah, and so based on what you're sharing here, I think it's good if you could share at least a draft of your proposal with the referee, as well as a comprehensive CV. And then it might be helpful if you have two referees to kind of ask maybe one referee to emphasize more this and another one to emphasize more that. So to get that comprehensive story about you, and you can guide the referees in that direction. But Giovanni, maybe you can share some of your experiences, how you went about getting your referees.
I can definitely do that. And I think the first thing is giving your referees enough time. So I personally asked about a month in advance. I've heard vaguely people suggest at least a few weeks in advance it should be given. I think it's important to select people who you feel know you well, who could comment on your potential. I asked my supervisor and I asked my previous honors supervisor. And I think it also helps, as Nicholas was saying, to ask if they would be willing to write you a strong letter. And just to get it out of the way, if you have multiple options, to gauge whether they would be really be able to write you a letter that's above and beyond. I think that's a good strategy. And as I guess as was stated, I attached my CV, I attached my proposal, of course, just to make sure like that there's coherence, as Maria was saying, between the proposal and what's written in the letter. And I also included a document where I made certain suggestions about about how we work together, potential strengths that they might highlight, and things that I guess I wanted highlighted from my application, like certain awards or certain training experiences that I had experienced with my referees. So I think, yeah, getting it on time, selecting the right people, and sending the right materials is key.
Yeah, yeah. And did you distinguish between the ask for emphasis with your two referees? Did you ask to emphasize different things from the
Yes,
referees?
yes, I certainly did. I felt that one referee, for instance, was more familiar with more of my extracurricular stuff and more basic research skills that I had, whereas the other one could really comment on my research abilities much more. So
Yeah.
I believe they emphasize different things. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so I have one last question for the panelists, all three panelists. So one final tip for applicants submitting an application this year. Maria, you want to start?
Yeah, I would just say, start as early as possible and have it read, by as many people as possible. Ask for the support of your supervisor. What Nicholas just said, that he reads, the proposals 9, 10 times, that's such great support. So if you start early, you can really, just take every opportunity to have it revised and improved before you submit it. But also just to, encourage you, we know it's a difficult process, very competitive, can be very discouraging. So try not to get discouraged. Ask for help, ask for support, and apply, as many times as you can. And I really wish everyone, good luck in the process.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicolas.
Well, I think as Giovanni said, get it down on paper. And so get it down on paper, your proposal. And I'm not saying every supervisor, so don't go away taking like expectation that your supervisor is going to read, a certain amount of times, or they should be reading it. Every supervisor is different. You're going to have that relationship. So, but the earlier you can get a draft, the more exchanges you can have. And I work your way backwards. So Samantha Mackey asks, you know, like what's the internal deadline versus the find out what the internal deadline is to your faculty or the university and work your way backwards. Okay, we're in August right now. Work your way backwards and create a checklist. Okay, I need to have a draft done by this date so people can actually make informed decisions on whether they want to write me a letter. It's always better if you can have a draft to send out to your supervisor and committee member to look at, and then next thing your CV. So have a checklist working your way backwards of when you want to have things done. Provide that checklist to your supervisor. Work with them on that, and try to get the drafts done and the different components of your application to any of the different grants that are available by those checklist deadlines, and that should help you not have the stress while you're trying to do coursework and other stuff, or you're TAing and RAing while you get to that deadline. And it's August 26th, and I think people still have 5 or 6 weeks. So again, just working through that checklist and deadline in terms of getting through things might help you as in terms of the best tip I can give you in preparing to submit your applications by those different deadlines.
Yeah, timing and time management. By the way, the internal deadline this year is September 24. So Giovanni, do you have some tips for your colleagues?
Yes, I'd say aside from what has already been discussed, which there's been some great advice, something that really helped me was just getting support from others. I think that, of course, your supervisor is key for technical things, like for instance, in your proposal, certain things like the methodology. But I wouldn't stop there. I think it's important to also get feedback from your lab mates, get feedback from someone outside of your field. This will help improve clarity. Like I was saying before, I get feedback from my parents, and I think it's a strong sign if they're able to follow and appreciate the proposal, for instance. And also just working together with people who are also working on similar applications, I think it could help with this overwhelming process. I think just knowing that you're in the same boat together, reaching out to a mentor, a friend, a colleague, your peers, I think that's very important. And yes, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, asking for feedback is again tied to the time management, because you need to give sufficient time to ask people for feedback, right? I mean, you cannot ask them the night before. So it's all tied together. A few things that we heard in previous session, and that also came about in this session, is the feasibility of the project. It needs to be feasible. It needs to be very clear that you can do it, that it is possible to do, and coherence across all the sections of the application. And again, that all comes together if you have sufficient time to go over it and make sure all the connections are clear in the application. So we've gone through that first part of our session here. So thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your advice and experience. So we will now move to the question period. So we'll take questions verbally, or you can put them in the chat. Just raise your hand or write them in the chat, and my colleague Christine will facilitate the question period. So let's go to the questions.
Thank you, Marijke. We're going to start with one in the chat. The question is, you talked about establishing the relevance of one research and its contribution to Canada. For those whose research primarily focus on global issues or outside of Canada, does this mean that you don't stand a chance? Also, those who are doing research by articles instead of a mono thesis, how does this impact on the application?
Who wants to answer the question?
I can go ahead. I think for the first question, I think Nicolas put the link towards the strategic priorities. And if you look at them, a lot of them are kind of global scope. So, and it explains why, you know, those global challenges are important to Canada. So I'd say take a look at those, and there are definitely ways to articulate it, and not at all like your project is relevant, just there are ways to link them to those strategic priorities. And I would say for the second question, article versus not by article, I don't know what you think, Nicola, but to me that would be like too much detail for the SSHRC application. Like it's not the place, like you would, write article, not article. I wouldn't even mention it in the SSHRC application. As a reviewer, it's not something that we're looking for necessarily.
Nicola, did you want to add?
Yeah, I would just echo those. Like, look, you're asking about global context, and in a world where the United States is imposing tariffs and isolational nationalistic strategies, and you see the Canadian Prime Minister over trying to tighten up ties with different partners and trade partners. I mean, now more than ever, it's important to see Canada's relation with other countries around the world and the impacts that Canada can make in relation to the global challenges that we face, whether that's climate change, climate change, conflicts in other parts of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So there are, you just need to articulate it clearly in terms of how your research advances, the well-being of fellow citizens here in Canada and or in First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities, in terms of the research that you're offering to do in those other places. So I think that's important, and like I said, the challenges, and yeah, I mean, when you're putting the proposal together, often for me, my doctoral students, they aren't even quite sure, like, because they haven't written their thesis proposal for some of them that are submitting the SSHRC proposal if it's in their first year. And then some of them might be just working on their thesis proposal if they're applying in their second year. And so I don't think you need to articulate whether you're doing it by thesis or articles. And even if you were doing it by articles, it shouldn't take away from the quality of what you're proposing to the reviewers. But I think that's too much. It might be too much information to provide.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
Thank you. The next question, we're going to take it live. So Samantha, you had raised your hand. So if you want to ask your question.
So much. So you mentioned that the evaluation process is 50/50, CV and the letter of intent. In the letter of intent, I probably focus on my research. Should I be addressing like other grants and submissions and other things that I'm on in the actual letter of intent, or just say like, look at my CV for that?
Who wants to take the question? Nicola?
I would focus on the research. Man, you could always layer in 1 or 2 sentences. That's the information I provide to your referees. They should be making the case in relation to what you've done in their references. So you could, like Giovanni said, is when you reach out to them, you could say, hey, could you please write a letter? Or if they accept, oh, thank you for agreeing. Here's some points that you might want to highlight, right? So you're doing a bit of the work, preparatory work for them to write a strong letter and making the case. It always helps. Like if I have a student that says, hey, highlight these points from my CV, that helps me. And then I go and double check to make sure that they actually are in your CV. So I would say, yeah, the reference letter is an important place to do it. And then yeah.
Okay, that's great. And then just to clarify the question I had in the chat, so the 24th is where we're submitting, even if it's on the SSHRC website, even though it says the 17th, that's for external this.
Correct. If you are looking on the instruction website, you're going to tell you where to apply. If you are currently registered at the University of Ottawa, you apply through us because we have a quota. If you weren't registered right now, but you were registered in 2025 at the University of Ottawa, I'm talking about domestic student right now, you apply through us as well. And I also want to mention that this year is the first time that international student will be admissible to apply to the doctoral scholarship. You have to be registered at the Canadian institution admissible at the time of the admission. So you have to be registered in September to be admissible to apply. The next question we're going to take is going to through the chat. So through the question is for the reviewers, what extracurriculars are most helpful in the application? So I don't know if you, Nicola or Maria, if you want to take the question.
Yeah, I think there can be so many I would just say look at those evaluation criteria and try to bring in all of the relevant experiences. You have, yeah. I wouldn't say there was a standard answer to that, but just try to, like Giovanni was saying, try to think about everything that you've done and highlight that and value that in your application in relation to those evaluation criteria points.
Yeah, and I would add to that, emphasize particularly those that you can link to your project. I mean, you want to emphasize them all, but particularly those that, demonstrate your skills and competencies to execute your proposal. Nicolas?
Yeah, I would echo the same as that what you just stated was that to highlight the ones. Or again, I would if in terms of my response to Samantha, I would highlight those two to your either your supervisor, or if you want two distinct letters, one person can focus on that while someone else focuses on something else in their reference letter in terms of that coordination. But to come back, any kind of research opportunities at the university, or conferences or student conferences that you can attend, professional learning workshops that you can attend, those are all important to show. If they're more closely linked to what you're proposing, even better. So you might search those out. Like I've had students where they're proposing in their proposal to use narrative inquiry as a research methodology, and they've gone and attended narrative inquiry international workshops with key people that host those, so that they can then demonstrate how they've done some professional learning to develop some of the research methodological skills in doing narrative inquiry prior to submitting their proposal.
Thank you. We're gonna now take a live question. Robin, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to go back to what you were saying earlier about explaining, say, like a year of bad grades. So in my specific situation, I have an MA and a BA with really solid grades, but I do also have a law degree. And at least when I went to law school, Canadian law schools all curved to a B. So my grades, well, I would say are good. They're lower than what you might expect to see typically on a transcript just because of that curve. And I've had applications in the past that have been flagged saying my grades are too low. But if you were to take out my law degree, they would be more than high enough. So I almost feel like I'm being penalized for having this additional degree. Is there a way that you would recommend, or that you could see being beneficial to kind of explain this?
I can respond. Robin, you know what? I'll tell you right now, I don't really care about grades at the table. Like, so that was a problem for me, was other evaluators looking. So I would always make the case, look, if somebody has this in terms of their career, and as you gave the context of being in law school, it's important to take that into consideration. But we're looking, is the proposal a really strong proposal? Does the person have all the necessary skills, or demonstrating the necessary skills in terms of where they're at in this moment in time in their career? And not to what that period in terms of your law degree and whatever took place, or even someone before that, if they had a bad year in undergrad, that's a snapshot of who they were then, not who they are now. And so articulating that in some sort of way that you can address, but having a B in law school, to me, that wouldn't be problematic in terms of submitting, at least from my perspective. A SHRC application, I would focus on the grades that you have or you've submitted in relation to your application of where you're at now and where you've been before. So I'm talking like a B. I'm not talking about B. I'm talking about some students have had really difficult years where they might have had a failing year, and then that's been looked at. So not a year of having Bs, but a year of having a failing year being brought up. And we're all human beings. We have struggles with mental health and well-being or lives in any given year. And as evaluators, I try to remind other fellow evaluators of that are of our humanness, and that whatever happened in one given year is a snapshot of what transpired in terms of doing that. And the second, just responding to another question that somebody asked about the humanities, that's another thing. There tends to be social science and the humanities, but there's a lot of social scientists around the table who dismiss anything that's proposed as humanities. So I would always try to remember, we do have humanities in the title, and that just as I would read something very social science or from psychology openly as a good proposal, we shouldn't just dismiss something just because it's coming from the humanities. So there's different strategies other than Statistics Canada that you could reference, but still important to make those connections. But I think I gave something in the response. There are different ways of getting into the popular zeitgeist of making your case for those sitting around the table. Everybody loves films, they love good books, and they can understand that, or they love music, they love dance, culture. So in really kind of tying in and connecting and making your case through that, I would think, again, as being fellow human beings around social science humanities, that a good proposal and making those links, people will be open to that.
Mhm. Maria, do you have a suggestion regarding the grades, or the issue?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I completely agree with what was just said, and just to reassure you, Robin, yeah, as committee members, again, like that would not be something that we will, penalize a candidate for. There is a specific section, I think, I don't remember how much space you have, but there's a specific section, I believe, for special circumstances or something like that. So yeah, if you do have to use it, by all means use it, and we do read it, and like Nicholas said, we're all human beings and we understand, and yeah, on the committee we'll always we'll advocate, for specific cases if necessary.
Yeah. And in that section, you can actually make the argument that in law school it is normal to have a B, right? That's the place to put it.
Thank you.
Christine?
Thank you. We're going to take another question via the chat. Not all research topics have an immediate and obvious social impact, especially theoretical work like mine in formal semantics and pragmatics. While such research contribute immensely to the advancements of knowledge, it's often difficult to directly link it to the SSHRC defined societal challenge. Given that not all of us work in applied social science, how are theoretical projects expected to articulate their relevance to SSHRC challenge area or to broader Canadian society? So, I don't know, Maria or Nicola, if you want to take the question.
Well, I mean, I think what you articulated would make the case in your contributions and proposals. So, I mean, I would, experimental physics, for example, if we didn't permit experimental physics to take place, we wouldn't have a lot of the contributions that we have now, or even in mathematics. I'm just giving those two as examples. One could say the same about philosophy itself in terms of philosophers. So it's not something that's novel. It's just, as you articulated, to ensure that you make the case that, like, what I'm doing right now is experimenting with theoretical, or I'm working theoretically in these areas to do this kind of work, but can't quite define or promise the implications in the future, which is perfectly fine. So, and I would come back to, like, this is not novel. I mean, we support research at university, experimental research at university without promise. And that, that's one of the core tenets of universities themselves. So again, I would just make sure you're clear about making the case in terms of your proposal and what you're trying to do, as you articulated in your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a live question. Wood Wozen, if you want to ask your question.
Yes. One of my question is in the application platform, there is funded research. So I was confused, like, do we need to mention like research that we undertaken like with a capital of high, like millions or thousands, like 100,000s, or I have like undertaken or being involved in a research like with smaller budgets. So do we need to include those research activities as well, or just with higher budget only? One is that question, and the other is on extracurricular activity. I couldn't locate where we can put this extracurricular activity about. Like, there's no section that we can put this into in the application, or is it on the proposal? Do we need to mention about it? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Giovanni, I think those are questions for you. So about the grants, What do you put? What do you not put? And then extracurricular activity.
Sure. Personally, I didn't really mention grants too much. I focused more on the research itself. I listed my own awards, of course, in the CV and so on. I did mention that the prof whose supervision I'm under is SSHRC funded. Is an expert in the field. They're able to guide me. They have the right expertise and so on. So that'd be my answer for that question. And unless it's changed, last time I applied, there's the research contributions, relevant experience, and activities document, where you're able to list first your research contributions, such as publications and conference presentations and so on. And then there's like applicant statement, and that is where I listed things like relevant activities and relevant experience. So for experience, I was able to get into detail of like the trainings I had done in undergrad and in my doctoral so far. But also relevant activities, such as mentorship and like my involvement in organizing conferences and graduate or associations. So I think that would be the section if things are the same with all of the changes that have been taking place.
I believe the portal is the same, so I don't think they make major changes. It's probably more, it's going to be more next year when they harmonize the application process.
So yeah, I encourage you to read the instructions for that section very carefully. Research, contributions, relevant experience, and activities. I'm fairly confident. And if you could mention some of those activities directly in your proposal as they relate, like anecdotally, I had one of my peers is a coach, and they're able to like mention that in terms of their research on motivation. So if you could make those links as has been discussed so far, I think that's a big plus.
Mm-hmm. So quick to Nicola or Maria, do you want to talk about the grants section? What are you looking for as from a reviewer?
I would say just because you're submitting your CV, so in your CV, I guess you can put everything, but then the text itself just connect it to the proposal and establish those links. So I would emphasize those projects that are directly connected to the proposed research.
And most importantly, all your awards, like Nicola had said, your entrance scholarship, even a travel scholarship you may have received during your master's, those things you need to put in evidence and they will be looked at, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, just to come back to the initial question, it doesn't have to be just large grants. It could be a small grant, but it's even more relevant than the larger grant because it's connected to what you're proposing. So it's not necessarily about the total amount of funding that you receive or whether it's part of it's how connected it is to supporting what you're doing. But you want it in your CV, you can list big grants, small grants, it's all important.
Yeah.
Thank you. Marijke, I think we're going to take one more question from the chat because we had that question in another roundtable. The question was directed to Giovanni. Did you have access to any winning proposal or access to your colleagues, application? And if so, do other applicants have access to winning proposals? So if you want to touch on that.
Yes, so I definitely did have access to multiple proposals. That were successful. I got some from my supervisors, previous students. And even right now, with some of my peers and people in my lab, I've been more than willing to share my own proposal with them and to kind of have a look at it. I think that's very helpful. So yes, I encourage you to seek out winning proposals. Your supervisor is a good resource for finding some of those, I think. But if anyone knows of any other places to find a winning proposal, feel free to add to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Christine, I think We're out of
Good.
time here.
Yes, unfortunately, we won't be able. There was a lot of question. We're going to look at the question and see if there is any way we can provide more information. And all the roundtable were recorded. So unless there's major technical problem, they should be available in the next few days. So we will send an email to everybody that were registered to the one of the roundtables, and they also going to be posted on our website. So Marijke, I'll let you conclude the event.
Okay, well, so thank you very much to our panelists and for those in attendance. It's the first time we do these sessions, so as Christine mentioned, we'll get back to you with the recording and actually also ask for a little bit of evaluation to see if we continue this or whether we should change the format. So some input would be really appreciated by the attendees. So we hope you enjoyed it, that you learned from it, and that it will help you with your scholarship applications. And once again, thank you all for attending, and we wish you a great day.